Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of What's New in Prisma. This one is a special episode because it's one of the first times that for a regular episode, at least, I think we've done a few specials where we also hosted the panel with multiple people. But today we have 3 people on the panel, and I'm especially excited that one of these is our new developer advocate, Sabin, who we have on the team, who we hired from the US. Hey, Sabin.
Hey, how's it going?
And then, of course, we also have our good old Alex on the stream, another developer advocate over here at Prisma. And my name is Nicholas, also developer advocate here at the Prisma team. And in What's New in Prisma, we talk about the latest Prisma release. We always pair it up with the release weeks that are happening every 3 weeks at the moment. So we're releasing new Prisma versions every 3 weeks. And following a Prisma release, we then host this show and talk about the latest release and also about the latest news from the Prisma ecosystem and community. And I think today we have a couple of really nice things to talk about because in the last release, we had a pretty exciting new feature that arrived in general availability. So it's now ready for production. And that's Prisma usage with MongoDB. I think a lot of you have been waiting for that. And then in today's stream, we'll also chat with a guest who has been writing a middleware library for Prisma that is caching Prisma like queries in Redis. And Sabin, I think you also prepared something for us today because before your time joining us at Prisma, you actually already built some tooling for the Prisma ecosystem as well. And you've built a tool called Aurora that also solves a big problem, I think, that a lot of our users have and provides a nice workaround for them. And that's splitting the Prisma schema into multiple files. And I'm really excited for you to show us around there.
Cool. Yeah, that'll be fun.
All right, let's dive into last week's release. I'm going ahead and going to share my screen as usual for this. Let me just very quickly rearrange this. Share screen. And there you go. And share. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
It's okay. It just says that Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen. Okay, so I would have to go and restart now. Maybe one of you wants to share their screen instead and just go to the release notes. Maybe that's easier than me dropping off. Can you maybe quickly jump in, Alex? Is your screen share working?
It should be. Yeah, I just have to open the tab.
All right. And for the record, we made sure that it works for Sabin for his demo later, and also double checked this with our guest in our prep session. But I don't know why Chrome now decided that I also would have to restart. So we're just going to improvise now, and Alex is going to share instead.
Cool. Give me a moment. Share screen.
All right, there it comes.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Let's just add it to the stream here. Yes, perfect. Now it's there. All right, maybe you can zoom in a little bit. And that's the 3.12 release. And really, the entire team in the last couple of weeks has been very much focused on getting MongoDB support ready. And that's why this release mainly consists of this big new feature that we are adding here. So yeah, MongoDB is ready for a general availability and people can now use it in production. That means that if you've been using it before, you can now remove the preview features flag and can just use it without that. And when you're using Prisma with MongoDB, you get a couple of benefits that we actually want to talk about a little bit later. So you can scroll over this, but maybe already open the release blog post in a new tab, Alex, because I think when we talk about the benefits, then that's something that we can look at. And maybe also open another
Zoom in.
tab already for the MongoDB launch week, and then go back to the release notes. I think you can also.
This is
or
MongoDB launch. That's why I try to figure out how to type live. It's always the hardest part.
All right, and you can go back to the release notes so that we can move over that. Yeah, so we have a release blog post that we're going to take a look at in a little bit as well, just to give you an overview of kind of the benefits that you get when you're using Prisma with MongoDB together. And we also prepared a bunch of resources for you that you can use when you want to use Prisma with MongoDB. So we have a getting started guide in our documentation that shows you how to get started with Prisma and MongoDB from scratch. But even more importantly, I think a lot of you already have existing projects that use MongoDB, and in these cases, you can actually already get started with these projects, and we have a guide for that in our documentation as well. And you can use the introspection feature that Prisma offers. And yeah, maybe we can also just talk a little bit about how that actually works a little bit later, because as you might know, MongoDB doesn't have a schema, so the introspection feature actually works a little bit differently than you're used to from relational databases. And we also want to make you aware of a couple of breaking changes that we have introduced before the GA release of MongoDB here. So if you're using the @db.array MongoDB native type before, that's now replaced with db.objectID. And I think if you want to use an array of object IDs, then you can now use Prisma's kind of like native notation for arrays, and that's just the square brackets inside of the Prisma schema. And in this release, we also added index support on composite fields, specifically type fields. So for embedded documents, since you can in MongoDB, you can also define indexes using fields from embedded types, and that's now fully supported as well. It actually required a little bit of work in the Prisma schema language, where we had to now figure out a new syntax for enabling this. But I think the solution that we found there with the dot notation actually makes a lot of sense and is probably intuitive enough for people to use. All right, What else is there in the release notes?
Connection pooling.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's an issue that's not related to MongoDB, but just a general issue that people have come across every once in a while. And it was really difficult for us to kind of pin down. Like we often have these cases where users report issues and then it's hard for us to reproduce them. So in an ideal world, when you're running into an issue with Prisma and you really feel that it's a problem on the Prisma side, some kind of bug, the best thing that you can do for us is to provide a small repository with a reproduction of that issues. Because that really then is the proof that like Prisma is not behaving as expected, and it helps us fixing it faster. In this case, it wasn't that easy to reproduce the issue, and I think the issue has been there for at least a couple of months before we were actually able to reproduce and fix it. And if you actually want to learn more about how that went down, you can, of course, check out the related GitHub issue there and follow the entire history of how that went about.
Cool.
All right, that's it. Of course, a bunch of smaller things. This is just a list of all the closed issues that we typically include with all the release notes. All right. How about we talk about MongoDB, and let's look at the blog post to kind of inform our conversation there. So this is the launch blog post. Some of you might have already seen it. If not, I think it's worth a read if you just want to get an overview over what like Prisma and Mongo is all about. And it also talks about a couple of the benefits. And yeah, maybe we can just take rounds, Alex and Sabin, to talk about some of the preferred benefits that we see with Prisma and MongoDB. And maybe I can start. So I think that one thing that's like really nice with Prisma and MongoDB is the fact that Prisma actually does add a schema to MongoDB, because as a developer, of course, it's nice to have the familiar kind of data model that MongoDB provides. It's all kind of JavaScript objects. And as a JavaScript developer, I'm familiar with that already. It feels kind of intuitive. But the fact that there is no schema, so no way for me to define the structure of these JSON objects, that might be nice at first when I just want to play around with it. But as I actually start to evolve my project, it grows in size, and also working in a team, I think it's actually much nicer when you can be more explicit about the data structures that you store inside of your MongoDB database. So that's one thing that I certainly think adds a ton of value, and is also a reason I think why people even use tools like Mongoose or TypeGoose or the built-in like JSON schema validation that MongoDB comes with. So I think the fact that Prisma now adds a schema to MongoDB is a really nice benefit that people get when they use the two together.
Yeah, again, I've said this a bunch of times. It's 2 years into the pandemic and I still can't figure out how to unmute myself. So the other thing about the MongoDB launch that I really appreciate is the cascading deletes and updates, which is we call the referential actions and the referential integrity, whereby, you know, if you have an author who has a bunch of posts, the moment you delete an author, you don't want to have ghost posts with no author linked to them. So I think this is a really valuable feature that I don't think MongoDB natively supports, that we provide as well. Yeah.
Right, that idea of kind of referential integrity that you usually have in a relational database, where the database itself, it can make sure that the relations that you store inside of your database are valid. So like you gave a really good example there with the users and posts, Alex, where a post can have an author, and when you're using a relational database, the database itself, it can make sure that the author that is associated with a post via the foreign key, actually that there is a record inside of the user table that corresponds to that foreign key, so that this relation is valid, and not, as you like called it, that there is kind of a ghost author, an author that actually doesn't exist assigned to a certain post record. So with Prisma, you do get an increased likelihood of referential integrity when using MongoDB, because indeed MongoDB on a native level won't give you any guarantees that the relations that you're storing inside of it are valid. And with Prisma, you can increase the likelihood. However, we should mention that it's not a 100% guarantee, because there are still kind of ways to sidestep the security mechanisms that Prisma provides there. And you can still shoot yourself in the foot, but you have to work a lot harder for it, I think, when using Prisma.
So one of the features that has really excited me is the default values backfilling. So in the Prisma schema right now, we have the default attribute that you can add. And basically, anytime you create a record, any field with the default attribute will be populated with the value you give it. With MongoDB, since it is schemaless, there is no real concept of a schema. There's no default values. The data can look different from document to document. So with this new addition, when you add this default flag, Prisma will actually go back and backfill all of that data for you with the default value you give it. That way you don't have records from the past that look different from newer records as your schema changes and your data changes. Because that was one of the major issues, specifically when people started adopting MongoDB and using it a lot more. They started to realize, yeah, it's super convenient that our schema is changing and we're able to iterate so quickly, but now we don't really know what the data looked like maybe 3 iterations ago. So with this feature, you can actually be sure that the older data is also going to get data for the new fields you add.
Exactly. And I think that backfilling, that is also available in relational databases. And there it works. I mean, like for relational databases, we use like Prisma migrate, right? We run the Prisma migrate commands. With MongoDB, actually, we don't really have the concept of migrations. So how does it then work? How do you actually apply the default values once you've added them to the Prisma schema and you just adjusted the file on your file system? How can you then actually do the backfilling? How does that work? That should be, yeah. You know how that works, Sabin?
I've played around with it a little bit. So you would do a DB push rather than using migrate, because that'll create when you do a DB push with MongoDB specifically, that'll create any new collections you've added or any new indexes. And in this case, it would be an index that it's pushing up.
Yeah. So it's basically applying the schema changes that you've made, because Prisma migrate commands, they just don't apply for MongoDB. So any kind of schema changes that you want to push into your database, you then actually run the DB push command for that. All right, yeah, I think, and then just like another thing that's really nice about Prisma and MongoDB, but just Prisma in general, is just the type safety that it provides, and that you of course also get when using MongoDB. And of course, that's also available for all kinds of relations. So not only the reference-based relations, but also for embedded documents that are also supported with Prisma and MongoDB. All right, yeah, maybe just scroll over the blog post to see if we missed any if we missed anything there, Alex. I think yeah, so that's the Prisma schema. It will help you ensure data consistency of the data that you've stored inside MongoDB.
Yeah. I think this is an issue with the loading of the page, but the schema should be formatted once I refresh. Yeah.
Yeah, if you reload, yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate.
Then there's auto-completion, the type safety of the database
auto-completion
queries.
Exactly. That's another benefit that's just enabled by the auto-generated types, and that's also available inside in JavaScript. So it's not only for TypeScript users, even though it's using the generated types under the hood.
Yeah. The cascading deletes and updates, the type safety.
These were the things that you talked about, indeed.
Yes.
All right.
That's about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Try it out.
And these are the links to the documentation, to the guides that I've mentioned before. So if you want to start with Prisma and MongoDB from scratch, that's where you can go. And there also is the button to go and start with an existing Prisma and MongoDB project. And yeah, like maybe we should also spend a second to talk about the introspection feature for MongoDB, because when you're using a relational database and you use Prisma's introspection, then you run Prisma DB pull. That's what invokes the introspection. And basically what Prisma then does, it just reads the table structures inside of your database and it translates those into Prisma models. For MongoDB, it doesn't quite work like that, because there are no structures, no inherent structures inside of MongoDB that can be read. So what Prisma does, it actually looks at the documents that you have stored inside of your collections, and it kind of infers the schema based on that. And if you have inconsistent data, then actually Prisma is going to point that out to you. For example, if you have a field called name inside of your documents, inside of a user collection, and for some reason or actually, let's maybe take another example with a field called age. And in some of the user documents, you have a string value assigned to that age field, and in others you have an int value assigned to it. Then Prisma is going to sample this, and it's going to show you basically a statistic of how often you use string and int, and then pick the majority, but still point that out in a comment inside of the resulting Prisma schema. So I think that's also a really nice feature that Prisma provides there.
Yeah, I should also clarify that it's not all the documents in your collection. It's just, it takes a sample and then infers types and the models from this sample. Yeah.
Exactly. And yes, then we have the MongoDB launch week, which is going to happen in 3 weeks, April 25th through April 29th. And Sabin, I think you have prepared a pretty cool content piece that we're going to publish in that week. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually have it pulled up right now. If maybe I could share my screen and sort of show what we're going to build.
Yeah, go ahead.
Definitely.
Sweet. Let's see. All right. So yeah, I'm super excited about this. I've put together this little application. It's a simple little, almost like a social media where you could send messages to other users of the site. And it's all using Prisma, MongoDB, Remix, and Tailwind for the styling.
Nice.
So yeah, we're going to be building pretty much every aspect of this, from the login, sign up and login, to the actual functionality itself. And what we're really going to be focusing on throughout this series, though, is sort of Prisma's interaction with MongoDB and how to store and retrieve all of this data, how we get the nice type safety and just sort of easy interactions with it.
Nice. So I've seen a couple of like high-level features already that really intrigue me. So like for one, it includes authentication. So we learn about that. Then I see these nice profile pictures there. So I'm assuming that users will also be able to like somehow upload files.
Yep.
Then there is filtering, I guess, when you search up there, like the message or name. And in terms of the data model, I'm also curious. I'm sure that you've used some of the specific kind of MongoDB features like embedded documents for this as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I can actually, let me get that real quick. I'm going to pull that up because that's something that'll be fun to look at. This is going to be the full schema that we're going to end up using with our user collection. And we're going to have some relations between authors and the kudos they've sent and the people who've received kudos. And then also, this here is the profile embedded document. So we're using the new type keyword here to make a embedded document. And that's where the profile information is going to live. So we're going to go through all of setting that up and how to query those. And I think it's going to be really fun.
Very, very cool.
All right. Question though, are the colors for each and every kudo random, or are they set? Yeah.
Oh, actually, that's a good question. So when you send a kudo, you can actually select which color you want to use. There's going to be some customizability there. And I will mention, as we build this application through the tutorials I'll be putting out, we aren't going to skip any over any of these components. I'm going to go through in detail how to build each and every one of these little components. So it should be pretty thorough. By the end of it, you should be able to put this together from the ground up by yourself.
Very, very nice. Yeah, I've tested the application already, as you can see, and I've complimented Wieland on his great hoodie there. So definitely a nice style choice. All right, folks, I think on our internal agenda, we had Sabin next to talk about Aurora, but I would actually suggest to not let our guest wait a lot longer and bring AJ up to talk about his project and the Prisma Redis middleware so that he can share a little bit about what that's about. How do you think about that?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, let's go for it then. Hey,
All
AJ.
right, thanks for having me. Hi, thanks for having me.
You're joining us from South Africa, right?
Yeah, that's correct. The Free State, a small town called Bloemfontein.
All right. How many inhabitants does the city have?
Well, the city, it's the smallest out of all of the 4 large ones, like Durban, Johannesburg, Cape Town, the more popular ones. Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a few million, but it's not a metro. It's just a small city.
All right, good to know. Yeah, so we brought you on today to talk about the Prisma Redis middleware library that you've been building. But maybe before we dive into that, how about you just introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background? And then we're also always curious about kind of the Prisma story of our guests. Like, how did you learn about Prisma? What did you use it for? We would love to hear all. We'd love to hear all of this.
Yeah. So my background is originally IT. So I worked at a small company working with servers, networking, and basically by all aspects of IT. And about 5 years ago, I started studying web development. And my first introduction to Prisma was actually Wes Boss's Advanced React course, his very first iteration that still used, I think, Prisma 1.20. And still I used a hosted cloud DemoDB. And that was basically my first introduction, and where I helped people in his community who got stuck with issues and questions. And at the moment, I'm actually working for Wes. I help out in his Slack community for anyone who's stuck with his courses. And I'm also working on his platform where people watch videos. So I'm helping upgrading it, adding more features to it. We're looking at adding TypeScript soon and hopefully upgrading it to GraphQL at some point, I think.
That's amazing. I've actually heard that he's working on a revision of this React Advanced course. And if I'm correctly informed, then he's using Keystone now for the backend side of things there, right?
Yeah, he recorded an initial release with Keystone beta, which still used Mongoose underneath. But since then, they've upgraded to Prisma. And I know now with Prisma being generally available, they should upgrade Keystone to hopefully add MongoDB back, because a lot of people like using MongoDB, and now at the moment they have to use Postgres. So hopefully, I think he's planning a re-recording at some point to add a new updated version of Keystone.
Yeah, actually super interesting that you mentioned the story with Wes Boss, because I'm hoping that he's not getting burned too much by always jumping on the latest tech. I'm certainly sure that in the Prisma 1 days, it wasn't always easy for him to keep up with all the changes that we introduced. And then the move from Prisma 1 to Prisma 2, I think also was just too big for him to really kind of follow up. He just wanted to have something more kind of batteries included for the backend, and where he had to do a little bit less work on it by himself. And I think with Keystone, he now found a good kind of backend framework that makes up for that.
Yeah, it's always he's always trying to push out new updates, and he pushes out at a beta release, and then it comes back to bite him within a few months usually.
And especially if you're recording video content, that makes it even harder, right? Because these are not as easy to update as written articles, for example.
Yeah, thankfully we added a new ability to the platform to add text notes underneath each video, so we can add notes as stuff changes to keep people updated.
Okay, yeah, that's a good strategy, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. And yeah, you've been building this Prisma Redis middleware library. So maybe first we should quickly talk about what Prisma middleware actually is. Maybe Sabin or you, Alex, you want to give it a quick shot to explain what Prisma middleware is, how it works, and what it might be used for?
Yeah, I'm afraid of being wrong if I take it up, but I'll give it a shot. The Prisma middleware is like a hook that intercepts every database request, and before it's saved or before you receive a response is sent back to whoever requested it, you can play around or modify the data, perhaps. Yeah,
exactly. I really like this notion of a hook, basically, that you're intercepting a Prisma query, right? And then maybe it's also somewhat comparable with Express middlewares that some people might be familiar with. You just hook into kind of the request lifecycle and can execute your own functionality there.
Yeah, and similar to the Express middlewares, you also get some sort of metadata about the the request that's actually happening, so the query that's going through, and you can sort of tap into that to change what the middleware is doing. So you can see things like which query is being run. If you're doing a find many or a find unique, you can actually tap into that. I think that's pretty cool.
So you could, for example, only write a middleware function that then applies to like find many queries, or only queries that are targeting the user model, or like you could be very specific in terms of which queries you actually want to intercept.
Exactly. Yep.
Nice. All right, AJ, and you now wrote a middleware that allows caching in Redis. So how does that work?
Okay, yeah. So when I initially had an issue with slow queries, I looked at the community to see if anyone wrote a library like this. And I found one called Prisma LRU cache, but it hasn't been maintained for some time. And I needed specifically to cache my queries in Redis. So I basically took their code base as an initial idea, wrote an initial version of mine, but I found it somewhat limiting. So I rewrote it recently using async cache the dupe, a small library made by Matteo and Simone at the Nearform team that basically allows you to cache data in Redis, but that also has a fallback to using in-memory storage. So if you don't have a Redis database, or if you're trying to test something locally during development, you don't have to go through all the flow to set up Redis. And basically it took a few iterations to go through it. But I ended up with a library that can basically cache queries based on the parameters you supply to it, and invalidates queries when you run a mutation method like create or update many.
Very, very cool. And were you or you like prepared a demo for this as well, right?
Yes, that's correct.
May want to go and share your screen, and we can take a look at what the library looks like in practice.
Let's go select screen.
All right, Alex, nobody noticed that you were gone. You closed your tab accidentally?
No, Edge froze. I know I'm not a psychopath for using Edge, but yeah, Edge froze, yeah.
All right.
Okay, I think I'm sharing. Okay, there it is. Okay, so basically I just created a small example that just initializes Prisma. The schema is just basically a user schema, just something simple that I wanted to show. And if we include the middleware, we can say create Prisma Redis.
And would you mind bumping up the size of the font a little bit?
Let's see. Is this large enough?
Perfect, yep.
Yeah, I think that should be good.
Okay, so the API for the middleware, if we were to create a cache middleware, is create Prisma cache. It has a few global options you can supply to it, like a cache time, which is in seconds. So you can say 300 for 5 minutes. And then any model that basically flows through the cache or this middleware will be cached. If you wanted to exclude some models from being cached, you can say exclude models and specify an array of keys like article or cart, and those will be excluded from being cached. If you wanted to exclude certain queries from being cached, like find many, you can add a find many, and all models will be ignored if that query is being executed. And if you needed a more granular way to set a caching strategy for each and every model, you can specify an array of models. Each key will be a model, like user. You can say cache time for this one should be 600 seconds. You can even set a different cache key, like let's say subscriber, which will then be used to cache each user as a subscriber. and you can exclude models specifically just for this single user as an array of, let's say, find unique. And if we save this, it should reformat. Let's add a comma. And this is basically, if I'm looking at this, the core of the API. This will use a in-memory store. To opt into using a Redis cache, we can create a Redis client. I'm using IO Redis, the library. And we can say storage. And that takes a type of Redis. The options is a client we want to specify, which is the Redis client. Redis. And we also need to specify an invalidation as true. By default, it won't invalidate queries, and you have to opt into it. So this is the core of the API. You can specify global strategies as cache time, exclude models, and exclude methods. And in per model, you can set an array of each option, and you can basically have a flexible cache.
All right. And these would override the global settings, right? If I do it then on a per model basis, that overrides the global ones. Gotcha.
Yes, that's correct. I'm going to add two debugging methods. I'm going to copy it from the example. It's basically a function that gets called when a value is found in a cache. It basically gives you a key, and you can log to see if it's being cached, and one called onMiss, which will log you the value if it's being missing from the cache. Now we can add a few methods just to test that the cache works. And we're going to add 2 users to the database. We're going to run a find many query, and we can even duplicate this query. And let's run this is npm run dev. And if we look at the console, for some reason, debugger is attaching. Let's run it again. Always when we do a demo, it breaks. Auto attach, let's disable that. Hopefully, it now doesn't. Let's just edit the notemon and remove inspect flag. And we clean the database. For some reason, it keeps attaching. I was testing this locally before we started the stream, and it was working.
That is so strange.
Let's just run.
Where does the debugger even come from then?
I'm not exactly sure. I did change a few things before we did a demo because I wanted to show how with breakpoints happens.
Right.
But we can do npm run. Let's just clean.
So Muhad recommends to close or change the debug console. I don't know if that would help.
I think something happened here with it. Because it's now stuck. Let's just run this here. We can enlarge the font. So if we run npm run dev, it should now have cached unless something happened.
So it did run the script now, right?
I'm pretty sure, yes, it's restarting. But it's not printing anything. Maybe it's because I excluded. Yep, I excluded find many. That's why.
Oh, okay.
So let's just remove all of these options.
That was proof it was working right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
maybe this is needed.
The exclude works.
Okay, now something should print out.
You saved the file properly, right?
Yeah, I never told Prisma to use it. That's where the issue was. I forgot to tell to use the middleware.
Ah.
All right.
So I created the middleware but never told it. Okay, well, now it should work.
I love this. Live debugging.
Debugging in real time, yeah. So as you can see, it missed the query the first time the find many request happened, and the second time it found it in the cache. If we looked at Redis and refresh it, we can see there is a string. So basically caches it with the model in front of the query, and then it stringifies the entire query. And if we look at the data that it cached, it's John at email and Mary at email, which is both what we ran here. And if we add, let's say, so let's say we add an update param, and then with that we can add, let's say, a few more queries, so a few count queries, and I find many. We can rerun this, clear the database, run it. You can now see there's multiple hits. It then runs the update command. So then when we run our count, it's missing. It then runs the count 2 more times, finds it in the cache, and it finds the find many query. And if you look at Redis, there's now 2 cached queries, one being the count method with a value of 2, and the user method that has been updated as well. I think it's just not refreshing correctly. But basically, it's caching queries, invalidating them, and then fetching them from the cache if they exist.
That's so nice. So instead of having to go all the way to the database for these kinds of queries, it can just fetch them from the cache and therefore just improve the performance of the entire query, basically.
Yeah, that's correct.
Awesome. There was one question in the comments whether this works for relation queries as well. Is there anything
I haven't tested,
specific?
I haven't tested it myself with a relation query. I think I'll run a test after this and maybe just write an actual test using the testing framework to see if it works. But I haven't tested relational queries myself yet.
All right. Cool. I don't think there were any other questions in the chat. So I think we can let you go, AJ. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to share this with us today. It's a really great library. We've been talking about this internally, and anytime people ask on Twitter or on GitHub about this kind of feature and whether like Prisma supports caching, we always recommend your library there. So great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. That's so cool. I love it when people just build the libraries and solving problems for themselves in the Prisma ecosystem. And yeah, I think you're also one of these people, Sabin. So before joining us at Prisma, you have worked with Prisma already at your job, and yeah, maybe also in some side projects already. And you came across this problem. There's a long-standing GitHub issue for that, supporting splitting the Prisma schema into multiple files, which a lot of people want. And you just said, okay, I'm going to solve this for myself, and I'm going to build a tool.
Yeah, it was an issue that was brought up a lot of times in the development team that I was working on. They were curious about how that would end up looking. And after seeing that there wasn't a built-in way yet, I figured Prisma provides all the tools to build your own solution, so why not go for it? And what I ended up with was basically, to simplify it down a bit, it's a fancy parser. It parses out the file and sticks it together with a little bit of safety features in between to make sure everything looks okay. But yeah, it does the job for now.
Very nice. And it's issue number 2377, in case people want to look this up. That's where people ask for this feature. And yeah, Sabin, maybe you can just, similar to what AJ just did, give us a little bit of an overview of how the tool works, if you like.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, it's still here. There you go.
Cool. Go ahead and drop this. So I've got this folder here that I've already created a little project. So I'll go ahead and open it. And I'll pull this over. Okay, so this is a little project that I put together just to show how this works. And we can see here in my development dependencies, I've installed Aurora. And it'll be up on the latest version. And what this allows us to do is it gives us a CLI tool to sort of stitch these files together. Over here in our Prisma folder, I've got a bunch of different files, and they have little chunks of a Prisma schema. You will notice that none of these would actually work by themselves. And in fact, the IntelliSense and autocomplete would probably complain if you tried to generate Prisma based off of any of these. But what we can do is we can take these files and just run Aurora.
Could you bump up the font just a little bit?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Should be better, yeah.
Great. Cool. So I ran the Aurora command, and what that did is it generated a file for us that has all of the contents put together. And this will go through and actually merge fields. So if you have the same model defined in multiple files, it'll pick that up and it'll put all the fields in here without duplicating any. And yeah, there's one little piece of this that I like to point out when I'm showing people how to use this, and that's setting up relations. There's a situation where, say you have a user model and you want to relate it to a profile. If you just try to put the user model itself in here, you'll see this red squiggly line, and that's because as far as the editor is concerned, there's no such thing as a profile yet. So what you kind of have to do is you have to just mock out a little bit of what a profile would look like with the basic relation fields. So you can say user here, give it a user ID, and then that's all you'll need to get it to stop complaining. Over in the profile, you do the same with the opposite relation. But here's where you'll actually define all of the fields.
Interesting. So like you'll have to take that as a workaround basically and have to like have this like not a ghost model because it exists, maybe a zombie model.
Yeah, exactly.
So like you'll have to put it there just as a placeholder to make like VS Code, our VS Code extension happy, because otherwise it'll be too eager to like point out the problem that you don't have defined the second side of the relation that Prisma always requires, right?
Exactly, yeah. And honestly, you don't have to have that there. It would still run properly. But yeah, in order to get rid of those errors, you have to have that there. And then and then it'll generate just fine. Like in this generated output, you're going to see this user relation show up here and the opposite side over here.
Right. I'm curious, is this actually something you think that you could solve for Aurora? Is that something that where you would have to build your own Aurora VS Code extension to pick up the information from each individual file, and then somehow, or like would it have to integrate somehow with Prisma's VS Code extension as well, right? Because Prisma's VS Code extension is the one that's showing the error. So I'm not sure if that's even in your realm of possibilities to solve there.
Yeah, I've started to look into it a little bit. I haven't found a good solution yet, and I'm thinking it would require some sort of maybe a plugin or sort of attaching to that extension or extending it. But it looks, based on the research I've done, it looks possible. I'm just not quite sure what that would look like yet.
Okay, yeah, it's certainly an interesting problem to solve. And actually, I'm also kind of curious how we're even going to solve this for the Prisma VS Code extension. I think one thing that will be nice that we can offer is that we can do command click on a relation field and then jump into the definition of that type inside of another file. So kind of how you do it with TypeScript types as well. When you like command click on a TypeScript type, you jump to its definition that also might be in another file. I think that's probably a flow that we can adopt here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that would be great. The last little piece of this that I want to point out is this config file. This is where you define which files to actually look at to generate the output. And so you give it an array and then the output directory. And this will actually, somebody recently added a PR to the repo where you can use blobs here instead. So if I wanted to, I could just do this. And
nice.
The same thing would work. Yeah, it's super cool. It's nice to see the community kind of jump in and add little features that I would have wanted anyways for me. So it's really cool.
And it's a pretty popular library, right? It has over 100 stars, and it seems to have like quite a bit of activity as well in terms of issues. So people are actually using it.
Yeah, I was surprised. I have a lot of people, messaging me about it and asking little questions, and I've had a ton of people, raise issues. And I think just recently someone posted on the discussions, they did something really cool with it where they're automatically generating that config file I just showed you based on the files that are there. So you don't even have to set it up. So it's
okay. So it looks at your file system and just takes all the .prisma files and then creates all the input files accordingly.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was really cool. People are sort of extending this now.
That's amazing. That's the ecosystem of ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. An abstraction over an abstraction. It's really fun.
Awesome. Since you're sharing your screen already, Sabin, maybe you can just leave it open, and for the call to actions that we have for our community, we can use your browser that you have open there. So I think for one, we just want to point people to our jobs page, prisma.io/jobs, and just make everybody aware that we are in fact hiring for various roles, from engineering to marketing and also developer advocacy. So if you want to join us here in a future episode on What's New in Prisma and be up on the panel with us, then you should go to our jobs page and check out the listings that we have there.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that. This is a fun group of guys to work with as a newcomer.
That's great to hear. And for product solutions engineering, so really a lot of different roles. So like wherever you are in your development career, I think you might be able to find something that suits you. Then another announcement that you might have seen if you followed us on Twitter is Prisma Day that is now officially announced and scheduled. I think it's just /day. If you just replace jobs with day, then you should be able to see the landing page there. So the CFP is open. We're accepting talk proposals. So if you're using Prisma, if you're building something with it, that's always great to see. We always want to hear about kind of your production projects that you're building with Prisma and learn about how Prisma helps you. But also if you're building tools for the Prisma ecosystem, so kind of similar to what Sabin has done, or AJ, who we had on the stream today, that also makes for great talks. Or really try to be creative when you're submitting your proposal there. And then, of course, you can also already buy tickets, I think. I think if you click on the Get Updates link, I think it sends you to a Typeform.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm not 100% sure, but we'll add the Get Tickets button soon there. And yeah, we should maybe also mention that it's going to be an in-person event as well. So we'll all come together in Berlin. Might be a good excuse for you to travel to Berlin. It's a really nice place to visit, especially in the summer. And if you can't join in person, then you can still join, because we're also going to stream the majority of talks online. So that's going to be possible as well. And finally, we've already mentioned this when we talked about the MongoDB release this week, but there is a launch week coming up for MongoDB in 3 weeks. Where we'll have 1 week of fun activities, events, lots of content that we're going to publish. So stay tuned for that. And you can also sign up for that. I think the URL is /mongodb-launch. And that's where you can get all the info and also subscribe for any updates. All right. Thanks, everybody. I think with that, we can leave you, and we'll see you here back in 3 weeks, actually, during the launch week. It'll still be kind of a regular What's New in Prisma episode, but maybe with a little bit of extra MongoDB theme that we'll add to it. I hope to see all of you there. Bye-bye, everyone.
Ciao.